Stay in your lane. Document. Your job is to patch holes, not make them. The words, slick with condescension, echoed off the corrugated metal walls of the briefing tent. The squad, a mix of hardened veterans and nervous newcomers, chuckled. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but the complicit kind, the sound of a pack affirming its hierarchy. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thorne, a man built like a munitions crate and possessing a voice that could strip paint, grinned, pleased with his audience. He gestured with a thick thumb towards Specialist Eva Rostova, who was on one knee, methodically checking the seals on her aid bag. She didn't look up. She didn't flinch. The only acknowledgement she gave was the slight, almost imperceptible pause in the movement of her hands before she resumed her task with the same deliberate calm. To Thorne, this silence was confirmation of her weakness, the timid non-response of someone who knew they were out of their depth. But a few of the older hands, men who had seen more than just this dust-choked valley, recognized the stillness for what it was, a containment of energy, a focus so absolute that the noise of the world simply ceased to exist. Captain Miller, the company commander, observed from the corner of the tent, his eyes narrowed. He saw Rostova's stance, the perfect economy of her movements as she organized chest seals and tourniquets. He saw the way her gaze swept the room without ever seeming to leave her work, cataloging exits, equipment, and personnel. He saw a professional. Thorne, however, saw only a medic, a small-framed woman assigned to his platoon for a high-risk reconnaissance patrol, and he saw a problem. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type quiet professional below. The heat inside the tent was a physical presence, a suffocating blanket woven from dust, diesel fumes, and a low-grade anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of every forward operating base. Thorne continued his monologue, his voice a gravelly roar over the distant thrum of a generator. Look, I'm not saying we don't need a medic, but this patrol is going deep into the red zone. We're looking for a high-value sniper team that's been picking off patrols for weeks. We need shooters. We need trigger pullers. Every rifle counts. He jabbed a finger in Rostova's direction again. She's carrying a standard M4 and a bag of glorified bandages. That's a liability, not an asset, when the steel starts flying. She should be back here at the aid station, waiting for us to bring her customers. Rostova carefully placed a fresh batch of Israeli bandages into a pouch, her fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. Her hands were clean, but her knuckles were scarred, a history written in pale, white lines across her skin that Thorne failed to read. She was the picture of unassuming competence, her uniform crisp but faded from countless washes, her hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. There is nothing about her that screamed warrior, and in Thorne's simplistic worldview, that was a fatal flaw. He mistook her deliberate quiet for fear, her methodical nature for slowness. He saw her focus on her medical kit not as a dedication to her craft, but as an avoidance of the harder, more violent realities of their profession. He was a man who measured worth in decibels and scars, and Rostova offered him neither. The rest of the squad took their cues from him, their casual dismissal of her a mirror of their leader's prejudice. They called her Doc, but it lacked the affection that usually came with the title. It was just a label, a box to put her in. The silence from Rostova was her shield and her statement. It was a language Thorne couldn't comprehend. While he filled the air with loud assumptions, she was engaged in a silent conversation with reality. She cataloged the likely injuries a sniper's 338 Lapua Magnum round would inflict. She visualized the application of a tourniquet under fire, the precise pressure needed, the angle of the drag to cover. She wasn't ignoring Thorne. She was simply prioritizing. His words were noise, but the physics of a bullet, the fragility of a human body, that was information. Her focus was a fortress, and his blustering arrogance was nothing more than wind against its walls. She finally cinched the last strap on her pack, stood up in a single, fluid motion, and slung it over her shoulders. It settled with a familiar weight. She picked up her M4 carbine, checked the chamber, and snapped the dust cover shut with a crisp, metallic click that seemed, for a moment, to cut through Thorne's diatribe. She looked at Captain Miller, her expression neutral, and gave a short, single nod. It said everything that needed to be said. I'm ready. The mission is all that matters. The captain returned the nod, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer. He had a feeling, a deep-seated instinct honed over a dozen deployments, that Sergeant Thorne was making a profound and dangerous miscalculation. The quiet ones, he knew, were the ones who carried the heaviest burdens and often the sharpest steel. Thorne, oblivious, clapped his hands together. All right, let's move out. Doc, you stick to the rear, stay out of the way, and try to keep up. Rostova simply fell into formation, her steps measured and silent on the gravel, a ghost in the machine of the squad, her presence felt but never truly seen by the men who judged her by the patch on her sleeve instead of the fire in her soul. The city was a maze of shattered concrete and sun-bleached mud brick, a graveyard of a place that smelled of dust and decay. The patrol moved like a centipede, each man an extension of the one before him, senses on a razor's edge. Sergeant Thorne was at the front, his voice a low growl on the comms, calling out sectors of fire. Captain Miller moved near the center of the formation, his customized M210 sniper rifle held at a low ready, his eyes constantly scanning the high-rise skeletons that served as perfect sniper hides. Specialist Rostova was where Thorne had ordered her, in the rear, but she wasn't just keeping up. Her head was on a constant swivel, her eyes not just watching their six, but analyzing every rooftop, every darkened window, every pile of rubble. She wasn't just looking for threats. She was mapping the terrain for cover, for casualty collection points, for avenues of egress. She was thinking 3 steps ahead, her mind a cold, clear engine of tactical medicine. The first shot came with no warning. It wasn't the familiar crack of an AK-47. It was a deep, chest-thumping boom that echoed through the canyon of the street, followed a split second later by the supersonic snap of the bullet passing inches over their heads. Everyone hit the dirt. Sniper, northeast high. Thorne yelled, his voice tight with adrenaline. Dust and concrete chips rained down from a pockmarked wall beside him. The squad scrambled for cover, returning blind, ineffective fire at the suspected building. The enemy wasn't a novice. They were patient, disciplined. They waited. Then the second shot boomed. This time it found its mark. Captain Miller cried out a sharp, choked sound and collapsed in the middle of the street. He was completely exposed, 100 meters of open ground between him and the rest of the squad, 100 meters of pre-sighted kill zone. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep into the squad's discipline. The younger soldiers were firing wildly, their bullets chewing up the facades of empty buildings. Thorne was screaming into his radio, trying to get a fix on the sniper's nest, but the shots were expertly placed, the muzzle flash impossible to spot. They were pinned, helpless, watching their commander bleed out in the open. "We can't get to him. Anyone who moves is dead," a private yelled, his voice cracking. Thorne knew it was true. The sniper had them perfectly bracketed. It was a textbook ambush. Amid the chaos, a singular, focused calm emerged. Rostova, pressed against the rough wall of a butcher shop, had not fired a single shot. Her M4 lay beside her. She was watching, her breathing slow and even. She ignored the storm of noise and fear. She was processing data, the angle of the sun, the direction of a light breeze that stirred the dust, the impact point of the first bullet on the wall, the location of Miller's wound. She saw the geometry of the problem. While Thorne saw an unbeatable foe, she saw a puzzle of angles and timing. She saw a solution. She keyed her calm. Her voice was shockingly steady, devoid of any panic, a sliver of ice in the firestorm. "Thorne, I'm moving. Cover me." Concentrated fire on the 3rd floor of the blue building, second window from the left. Now, Thorne was about to scream at her to stay put, to follow his orders, but the sheer authority in her voice, the absolute certainty, stunned him into a moment of obedience. "Do it," he roared to the squad. A torrent of suppressive fire erupted, focused on the window she'd indicated. It was in that moment, under the deafening roar of their covering fire, that Rostova moved. She wasn't running. She was flowing. A low, impossibly fast crawl that ate up the ground, using every shadow, every small piece of debris as concealment. She was a whisper of motion, a fleeting shadow against the sun-scorched earth. The enemy sniper, momentarily distracted, sent a round smashing into the pavement just inches from her. But she didn't stop. She reached Miller's side, a phantom appearing out of the dust. The captain was conscious, but his leg was a ruin, blood pulsing from his femoral artery. He was dying. With brutal efficiency, Rostova ignored the incoming fire that was beginning to find its range again. Her hands moved with a life of their own, pulling the tourniquet from her thigh rig. She cinched it high and tight on his leg, twisting the windlass with practiced force until the bleeding stopped. She packed the wound, her movements economical and precise. She had bought him minutes. Now she had to buy them their lives. She grabbed the front of his vest. "Sir, we're moving," she said, her voice a low command. He was a dead weight, but she dug her heels in and began to drag him, inch by painstaking inch, back towards cover. The sniper's rounds chased them, kicking up angry spurts of dirt and concrete all around them. It was a Herculean effort, a testament to a will forged in crucibles Thorne couldn't even imagine. She hauled them the final few feet, collapsing behind a low concrete wall, both of them gasping for air as bullets whizzed over their heads. The rest of the squad stared in stunned silence, their suppressive fire faltering. They had just witnessed something impossible. The fight wasn't over. Captain Miller, fading but lucid, looked at Rostova. His face was pale, his breathing ragged. He pointed a trembling finger at his rifle, the M210, a thing of beauty and precision engineering. "Rostova," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "The wind. From the west. 10 clicks. 2-degree upslope." He was giving her firing data. He saw what Thorne and the others didn't. He saw the professional who had been hiding in plain sight. He knew what she was before she did. Rostova didn't hesitate. She left the captain's side, grabbed the heavy rifle, and settled it onto the concrete barrier. It felt like an old friend in her hands, the weight and balance intimately familiar. Thorne's voice crackled over the radio, a frantic, confused yell. "Doc, what the hell are you doing? Get down. That's an order." She ignored him. The world narrowed to the circular view of the high-powered scope. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat a steady, powerful drum. She wasn't a medic anymore. She was something else entirely, something older. She saw the heat, haze shimmering off the distant rooftops. She saw the subtle sway of a piece of cloth hanging from a window, confirming the captain's wind call. She saw the slight discoloration in the shadows of a window on the 5th floor of a different building, the one she had identified earlier, not the one she had them target. A spotter's nest, a fatal mistake on their part. Her finger curled around the trigger. She exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs, entering that place of perfect stillness where the rifle becomes an extension of the self. The crosshairs settled. A gentle squeeze. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a massive, controlled explosion. The sound was a deep, resonant crack that silenced all others. For a full second, nothing happened. Then a figure pitched forward out of the 5th-story window, a silent, tumbling doll. The enemy sniper was gone, but she wasn't finished. She worked the bolt with fluid speed, the motion as natural as breathing. She shifted her aim slightly to the left. She knew there was a spotter. There was always a spotter. She scanned, her eyes picking up the flicker of an optic lens. Found him. The second shot was a mirror of the first. A control breath. A perfect squeeze. Another crack of thunder rolling down the alley. The glint of the optic vanished. The ambush was broken. The ensuing silence was absolute, a deafening void where the chaos had been. It was heavier, more profound than any sound. It was the sound of disbelief. The squad slowly rose from their cover, staring first at the distant building, then back at the small, quiet medic who was now calmly clearing the chamber of the M210 rifle. Sergeant Thorne just stood there, his mouth hanging open, his radio silent in his hand. The words he had spoken just an hour ago, "Your job is to patch holes, not make them," hung in the air, a monument to his own spectacular ignorance. He looked at Rostova, Truly looked at her for the first time, and he didn't see a medic. He saw a predator. He saw a professional. Back at the FOB, the medevac chopper's rotors beat a frantic rhythm against the setting sun. Captain Miller was stabilized, his face a pale mask of pain and gratitude. Before they loaded him, he grabbed the arm of the base commander, a grizzled full-bird colonel who had come to oversee the evacuation. "Sir," Miller rasped, his voice weak but firm, "I need to see Specialist Rostova. Now, and I want Sergeant Thorne and the rest of my squad in the command tent for an immediate after-action report." The request was unusual, but the look in Miller's eyes brooked no argument. An hour later, the squad was assembled in the sterile, air-conditioned chill of the Tactical Operations Center. They stood in a loose, uncomfortable formation, avoiding each other's eyes. Thorne looked like a man who had been hollowed out, his usual bravado replaced by a stunned, vacant shame. Rostova stood at ease, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression as unreadable as ever. She had cleaned and returned the captain's rifle, and her aid bag was already restocked, ready for the next call. The colonel stood at the head of a long table, a tablet glowing in front of him. Captain Miller was present via a video link from the hospital, his face projected onto a large screen. His voice, tinny but strong, filled the room. "Sergeant Thorne," he began, "tell me what happened out there." Thorne cleared his throat, his voice rough. He recounted the events of the patrol, his words clipped and factual. He didn't embellish. He didn't make excuses. When he got to the part where he was pinned down, watching his commander bleed out, his voice faltered. "We were compromised, sir. Pinned. No viable solution." He paused, then forced himself to look at Rostova. "Then the specialist. She moved. She saved you, sir. Then she ended the engagement." The understatement of the century hung in the air. Miller let the silence stretch. Then he looked to the colonel. "Colonel, if you would." The colonel nodded grimly. He swiped a finger across the tablet, pulling up a personnel file. Eva Rostova's name and photo appeared on the screen, projected beside Miller's face. "I think it's time we all learned a little bit about our specialist," the colonel said, his voice laced with cold iron. "Most of you know her as a 68 Whiskey, a combat medic, and she is an excellent one. But that's not where her story began." He began to read from the file, his voice a low, steady cadence that hammered home the truth with every word. "Prior military occupational specialty, 18 Bravo, Special Forces Weapons Sergeant." A wave of shock rippled through the squad. An 18 Bravo was a Green Beret, an expert in every weapon system in the U.S. and foreign inventories. They were legends. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. The colonel continued, his voice relentless. "Assigned to a Joint Special Operations Command Cultural Support Team, attached to." Well, the unit she was attached to is classified. He let that sink in. She had operated with Tier 1 assets, the ghosts of the battlefield. Distinguished Honor Graduate, Special Forces Sniper Course, Fort Bragg. Highest qualification, Master Marksman. Documented combat effective range with the M210 system, 1,400 meters. She holds the third longest confirmed sniper kill for any female soldier in the U.S. military. He paused, letting the weight of that information crush the remaining arrogance in the room. She served 3 full combat tours in that capacity before receiving injuries from an IED blast that disqualified her from continuing in an 18 series MOS. Instead of taking a medical discharge, she requested to reclass as a medic so she could, and I quote from her transfer request, "continue to serve and bring people home." The colonel looked up from the tablet, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the squad before finally landing on Thorne. "Sergeant Thorne, you told your medic to stay in her lane. The tragic irony is that her lane is a damn sight wider and more dangerous than yours will ever be. You saw a patch, and you made an assumption. Your assumption almost cost you your commander and your entire squad. Her competence, the very competence you dismissed, is the only reason you are all standing here right now." Captain Miller's voice came back over the speakers, filled with a quiet intensity. "Eva," he said, and the use of her first name was a mark of profound respect. "Thank you." Then he looked at the screen, at the men of his squad. He struggled to push himself up on his elbows, and, despite the pain, he rendered a sharp, formal salute to her image. "Thank you, Sergeant Rostova," he used her former rank. It was the ultimate validation, a public restoration of the honor Thorn had tried to strip away with his ignorant words. The shame on Thorn's face was now complete, a burning, public humiliation that was entirely of his own making. The other soldiers stared at Rostova with a new, profound sense of awe and respect. She was not just Doc. She was a living legend, hiding in plain sight, who had never once felt the need to mention it. She simply met the captain's gaze on the screen and gave that same small, single nod. Understood. The story spread through the FOB like a wildfire in a dry canyon. It started as whispers in the chow hall, then became detailed retellings in the smoke pits, and finally evolved into a full-blown legend passed between units. They called her the Ghost Medic. They called the Sniper's Alley Rostova's Run. The details became mythic. In some versions, she took out the sniper team with a single bullet. In others, she did it while simultaneously performing surgery on the captain. The legend of the quiet medic who was secretly one of the most lethal soldiers on the entire base became a cautionary tale for every loudmouth NCO who thought they knew it all. Sergeant Thorn underwent a profound transformation. The bluster and arrogance were gone, stripped away by the harsh light of reality. He was quiet now, introspective. A few days after the debrief, he found Rostova by the vehicle depot. She was sitting on a crate, meticulously cleaning the bolt of her M4. He stood before her for a long moment, shifting his weight, the words caught in his throat. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and hoarse. "Specialist, Rostova." She looked up, her expression patient, waiting. There's no excuse for how I treated you. For what I said, I was arrogant, I was ignorant, and I was wrong. You saved us. All of us. You saved me from my own stupidity. I am sorry. It was a complete, unconditional surrender of his ego. It was the hardest thing he had ever had to do, and the most necessary. Rostova finished wiping down the bolt, slid it back into the carrier, and closed the action of her rifle. She looked at him, her gaze clear and direct. "We're a team, Sergeant," she said simply. "You do your job. I'll do mine. That's all that matters." There was no malice in her voice, no "I told you so." There was only the calm, unwavering focus of a professional. She had not sought an apology, and now that it was given, she accepted it with the same lack of ceremony with which she had accepted his insults. For her, it was all noise. The mission was the only signal. The apology, however, was not just for her. It was for him. It was the first step in him becoming the leader he was supposed to be. He learned the most important lesson of his career that day, that strength has many forms, and the most dangerous is the one you don't see coming. Rostova, for her part, deflected the newfound fame with the same ease she deflected bullets. When young soldiers approached her with awestruck questions, she would simply point to a piece of their gear and say, "Is your equipment clean? Is your magazine loaded? Focus on your job." She began quietly mentoring some of the younger medics, not on shooting, but on how to stay calm under pressure, how to compartmentalize fear, how to focus on the task at hand, no matter how chaotic the world became. She was teaching them her true superpower, not her marksmanship, but her unshakable mental discipline. Captain Miller, recovering at a hospital in Germany, made one more request. He had the two spent 308 shell casings from the shots Rostova had fired recovered from the alley. He had them mounted on a small, simple wooden plaque with a brass plate that read, "Competence is a virtue. Assumption is a sin. Rostova's Run." He had it sent back to the company. It was hung in the command tent, a permanent reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most important one to listen to. Months later, the unit was preparing to rotate home. The dust, the heat, and the constant tension were about to be replaced by green grass and the easy comfort of peace. The transformation in the squad was palpable. Sergeant Thorn was a different man. He was a better leader, quieter, more observant, more respectful of the diverse skills of his soldiers. He no longer led from the front with his voice, but from the center with his eyes and ears. His first briefing to a new batch of replacement soldiers became a ritual. He would gather them in the command tent, stand them in front of the plaque with the 2 shell casings, and he would tell them the story. He would tell them about his own arrogance, his own blindness. He told them about the quiet medic he had dismissed, the woman who had walked through fire to save her commander. He told them about the 2 perfect shots that had come from a place of discipline and training he couldn't fathom. "Look around you," he would say, his voice now a quiet, resonant rumble instead of a roar. "Don't judge the soldier next to you by the patch on their sleeve, their gender, their size, or the volume of their voice. Judge them by their actions. Judge them by their professionalism. Your assumptions can get you killed. Your respect for competence will keep you alive. Out here, you don't know who you're standing next to. You could be standing next to a farmer, or you could be standing next to a ghost. Treat everyone with the respect a professional deserves. Until they prove otherwise, the story of Rostova's run had become institutional folklore, a foundational myth for the company. It was no longer just a story about a single firefight. It was a parable about humility, prejudice, and the silent, undeniable power of demonstrated competence. Rostova herself remained unchanged. On the flight home, while others were celebrating, laughing, and releasing the tension of the long deployment, she sat by a window, reading a thick medical textbook. She was already preparing for the next mission, for the next life she might have to save. Her war was not about making holes or patching them. It was about a standard of excellence she held herself to, a quiet, personal code that required no audience and no applause. Her legacy was not in the 2 shots she fired, but in the silence that followed, a silence that had forced an entire unit to stop, to listen, and to learn. True strength isn't loud. It's effective. It doesn't boast. It performs. It doesn't seek the spotlight. It simply is, waiting patiently for the moment it is required. In that moment, it changes everything. It redefines the battlefield. It reshapes leaders, and it reminds us all that the most powerful force in the world is not the thunder of a rifle, but the quiet, unwavering resolve of the person holding it. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent action defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.